So imagine this. 3,000 years ago, like way before red receipts or ghosting or even the whole concept of a situationship, someone actually mapped out the exact psychological blueprint for human connection.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to think about.
Right. And today, for you listening, we are pulling apart chapter 3 of the Song of Solomon. But we're not looking at this as just, some flowery ancient wedding poem.
No, not at all. We have to look past the metaphors.
Exactly. We're looking at it alongside this deep historical and psychological analysis that basically treats it as a structural guide. Our mission for this deep dive is to see how a relationship goes from complete ambiguity through the friction of pursuit to this heavily guarded public reality.
Right, because it's entirely a progression of psychological states. I mean, when you look past all the ancient imagery like the chariots, the myrrh, the city streets, you're left with a startlingly accurate map.
A map of how security is actually built.
Exactly. And the text, it really doesn't shy away from the deeply uncomfortable phases of connection. It acknowledges that to secure something real, you have to move through these distinct phases of vulnerability.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the narrative kicks off in a really uncomfortable place, like right in the dark.
It does. It starts with a jarring realization.
Yeah, the protagonist, the bride, she's on her bed at night, and she just experiences this acute absence. She's seeking one her soul loves, but he isn't there.
Which forces a choice.
Right. It's the sudden recognition that this profound connection is out of reach.
Yeah.
And she's forced into a binary choice, right? Like remain passive or take action.
And that choice is the crux of the very first psychological hurdle because, the natural human tendency, especially when we feel that vulnerability of absence, is to just retreat.
Because passivity feels safe.
Exactly. Passivity feels incredibly safe. If you just stay in bed, if you don't acknowledge the absence out loud, you protect your ego from potential rejection.
You can't fail if you don't try.
Right. But her response in the text is entirely proactive. The text actually reads, I will rise now and go about the city and the streets, and in the broad ways I will seek him whom my soul loveth.
She actually leaves her comfort zone.
Yes, she willingly enters the friction of the unknown city just to resolve that absence.
Wait, but if I do that today, if I go out actively searching for someone and demanding clarity, modern dating advice is going to tell me I look desperate.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we have an entire cultural apparatus built around playing it cool. Like the person who shows the least amount of effort has all the power.
Yeah.
So how does this ancient text reconcile her actions with our modern fear of, over-investing?
Well, the analysis draws a very sharp distinction that modern culture almost always blurs, and that's the mechanical difference between intentional pursuit and desperation.
Okay, break that down for me.
So desperation is basically an anxiety response. It's erratic, it lacks boundaries, and it fundamentally seeks emotional regulation from the other person.
Like saying, I'm falling apart, please fix me.
Yes, exactly. But intentional pursuit, which is what we see in the text, is grounded action. It's just an outward mechanical acknowledgement that this connection holds value. You're moving towards something you want, not running away from an internal panic.
Oh, I see. So it's kind of like the difference between investing in a company because you studied its fundamentals and you believe in the long-term value versus
panic buying.
Right. Panic buying a stock because you have severe FOMO and you're terrified of being left behind. I mean, both involve spending capital, but the underlying energy is completely different.
That is a perfect structural analogy. When she rises and goes into the city, she's acting as a steady investor. She's not flailing around. She is executing a deliberate search.
Because passivity guarantees nothing.
Precisely. The text is establishing a core law of relationships here. If you adopt that modern defense mechanism of playing it cool, you're just signaling low investment.
And low investment triggers reciprocal low investment.
Right, and then you just end up in this standoff of mutual apathy. You entirely miss out on the connection because both people were, too busy protecting their egos to take a real structural risk.
Wow. But this is but her structural risk doesn't pay off immediately, does it?
No, it doesn't.
She goes out into the broad ways of the city, and the text specifically notes that she still doesn't find him. Her intentional action literally leads her straight into an information void.
And this brings us to the second phase of the blueprint. How do we handle ambiguity and delay?
The dreaded delay.
Because she acted instead of waiting, she exposed a secondary problem. Just because your pursuit is intentional and, just because the connection is valuable, the universe doesn't just hand you an immediate, frictionless result.
Real connections have natural periods of distance.
Exactly. The real challenge the text is presenting is how you navigate the psychological torment of missing information.
Which is so relevant for you listening right now.
Yeah.
Because our brains are fundamentally prediction machines, right?
Uh,
When we hit an information void,
the brain panics.
yes. In modern terms, it's like when you send a text and you see those 3 little typing bubbles and then nothing. Absolute silence. Your brain lacks the data to predict the future, so it just starts running simulations.
And because it prioritizes survival, it almost always simulates the most catastrophic scenarios.
Right. We never assume the person is just busy. We assume they've discovered all of our deepest flaws and abandoned us forever.
We really do. And that is exactly how false narratives take root. When you sit in the anxiety of an information void, those internal catastrophic simulations start to feel like objective reality.
But she doesn't do that. She doesn't go back to bed and spiral.
No, she provides a direct mechanism to disrupt the anxiety loop. She encounters the city watchman.
These objective third parties.
Right, and she asks them a direct clarifying question. Saw ye him whom my soul loveth?
She actively seeks data to collapse the ambiguity. She's choosing objective truth over subjective anxiety.
Exactly. And think about the risk there. She's willing to hear a painful answer. Like maybe they say, no, we haven't seen him.
Because a painful truth is structurally sound, but an ambiguous void is just entirely destabilizing.
Yes. That willingness to ask the hard question shifts the entire power dynamic. She refuses to let confusion be the baseline reality of her emotional state.
She demands clarity.
Right. And this highlights a really crucial distinction for navigating human connection. You have to learn the difference between temporary distance and consistent inconsistency.
Well, that's good. Temporary distance versus consistent inconsistency.
Yeah, because temporary distance is just a pause in data. But consistent toxic inconsistency is a pattern of unreliability. And you can't tell the difference between those two unless you're willing to ask direct questions.
And observe the answers. I mean, the discomfort of asking a clarifying question is momentary, but the chronic pain of ongoing ambiguity, that can drain you for years.
Absolutely.
So she pushes through that ambiguity, she seeks the data, and finally we hit this massive pivot point in the text. She finds the resolution.
She finds him.
Yeah. In verse 4, she says, "It was but a little that I passed from them, but I found him whom my soul loveth." But her reaction here completely defies modern dating scripts.
It really does. Her immediate reaction is one of absolute claiming and containment. She says, I held him and would not let him go.
And she brings him into her mother's house.
Yes, into the chamber of her that conceived me. She also makes this solemn charge to the surrounding community, swearing by the roes and hinds of the field, not to awake love until it pleases.
Let's really break down the mechanics of this mother's house, because pulling someone into a hidden, deep inner chamber is the exact polar opposite of our modern instinct today.
Oh, for sure.
Today, the second someone secures a connection, the reflex is to broadcast it, right? People want to soft launch the relationship on Instagram. They post a vague picture of, like, 2 coffee cups.
Or a hand resting on a steering wheel.
Exactly. So why does this ancient text insist on pulling the relationship into this deeply private space instead of publicly celebrating the victory?
Well, it comes down to the psychological observer effect. You know how in physics, the mere act of observing a phenomenon actually changes its behavior?
Right, the double-slit experiment stuff.
Yeah. The same is true in relationships. When you broadcast a fragile new connection to an audience, whether that's social media or just a wide circle of friends, you introduce massive external pressure.
So you start performing for the audience.
Subconsciously, yes. The individuals start optimizing for external validation rather than internal security.
They start acting out what a good couple looks like, instead of doing the actual unglamorous work of figuring out if they're compatible. It's like using cheap external validation as a substitute for real trust.
That's spot on. The mother's house represents the ultimate closed ecosystem. Architecturally and psychologically, it's the bedrock.
A place of origin and safety.
Right. By pulling the connection into this private space, she enforces a boundary. It allows trust to develop without the distortion of an audience.
Like pouring concrete into the dark. You don't build a skyscraper by starting with the shiny glass exterior. You dig a deep, hidden hole.
Exactly. That's what the mother's house is. It's the invisible structural work.
And what about the phrase, "I held him and would not let him go"? Because today, people might call that clingy.
But based on the progression we've seen, it's not anxious clinging. It's the logical conclusion of her intentional pursuit.
Right, because she spent so much capital navigating the dark and asking hard questions.
Exactly. When you braved the ambiguity, you recognize the immense rarity of what you found. You don't play games with it.
You don't casually let it wander off to see if it comes back. You secure it.
The recognition of value dictates the behavior. She stops testing the connection once it's found. And her charge to the community not to awake love until it pleases, that's a profound respect for the natural gestation period of trust.
Demanding it mature at its own pace.
Right, entirely insulated from external timelines.
But here's the thing. A closed system can't remain closed forever, right? Or it stops being a foundation and starts becoming a prison.
That's right. And this is where the text executes an incredible cinematic shift.
It really does. Once that deep bedrock is poured in the mother's house, the environment radically changes. We go from this quiet, hidden room to a highly visible, loud, heavily armored public procession.
We transition into the imagery of King Solomon's wedding parade.
The pillars of smoke.
Perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, it describes a chariot made of the wood of Lebanon, with silver pillars, a solid gold base, a purple covering, and an interior paved with love.
I mean, it's an absolute sensory overload.
Yeah.
And the gold, the silver, these aren't just pretty poetic details, are they?
No, they are structural indicators of the highest possible value. The relationship is no longer a private experiment.
It's an undeniable, formalized reality.
Exactly. The necessity of this public formalization is vital to the blueprint. A private connection must eventually graduate into visibility.
Otherwise, it devolves into a modern situationship.
Yes. If it remains hidden indefinitely, it ceases to be a protected mother's house. The grand procession signifies that the internal security built in private is finally strong enough to withstand the scrutiny of the public square.
It's the ultimate display of defined status.
Wow.
Which completely dismantles the idea of the indefinite situationship where people keep parameters blurry on purpose under the guise of going with the flow.
True connection naturally gravitates toward definition.
But there's a detail in this procession that demands analysis.
Yeah.
It's a security detail. The chariot isn't just beautiful, it's militarized.
Yes, the 60 valiant men.
The text states the bed is surrounded by 60 valiant men of Israel, all expert in war, with swords on their thighs. Why heavy weaponry at a romantic wedding?
This is perhaps the most sophisticated psychological insight in the entire poem. It connects directly to value.
How so?
When you possess something of immense worth, like a fully realized, committed connection, you do not leave it unguarded.
Right.
The text specifically notes that the armed guards are present because of fear in the night.
Fear in the night.
Yes, which represents external entropy. It's the pressures, the temptations, the vulnerabilities, and just the destructive forces that naturally erode human bonds over time.
So the swords represent boundaries. Like, if you have a treasury full of gold, you don't just leave the vault door wide open and hope no one wanders in.
Exactly. You establish perimeter defenses.
In a modern context, those swords are the behavioral boundaries, a couple sets. It's financial transparency, it's prioritizing the partner over external influences, it's refusing to entertain dynamics that threaten the relationship.
The valiant men symbolize an active, fierce, ongoing protection of the commitment. The text is making a definitive statement here. Real value requires defense.
That's powerful.
If a relationship has no boundaries, if it's completely permeable to outside opinions or ex-partners or endless ambiguity, it lacks the guards necessary to sustain itself.
So a refusal to define a relationship is functionally a refusal to station guards at the door.
Precisely. It leaves the connection entirely vulnerable to that fear in the night.
It really recontextualizes what true commitment looks like. We so often view commitment as just a verbal promise, but this blueprint defines it as an active, defensive posture.
It's visible, highly valued, and vigorously protected.
If you're accepting a dynamic that stays constantly vague, undefined, and unprotected, you're operating entirely outside the mechanics of secure human connection.
Right. And when you look at the complete trajectory mapped out by this text, it offers a remarkably coherent system.
Synthesize the journey for us.
It begins by identifying the danger of passivity in the face of absence. It teaches the necessity of intentional pursuit over anxious desperation.
Demanding objective data to break the toxic loop of ambiguity.
Exactly. Then it emphasizes the critical importance of a closed, private ecosystem, the mother's house, to build trust without an audience. And it concludes with the mandate that true commitment must eventually become a visible, defined, and heavily guarded reality.
It really forces you to evaluate every phase of how you handle connection. I mean, the mechanics haven't changed in 3 millennia because the human nervous system hasn't changed.
We still fear absence, and we still spin false narratives in the silence.
And we still desperately need the security of a heavily guarded foundation. So for you listening, I want to leave you with a direct challenge based on this ancient blueprint. Look at the connections that matter most to you right now.
Ask yourself the hard questions.
Are you hiding behind the defense mechanism of playing it cool, or are you executing intentional pursuit? Are you letting anxiety breed in the information void, or are you willing to ask the hard questions to get objective clarity? Have you built a solid private foundation, or are you substituting real trust with the cheap validation of a public audience?
And finally, are there active boundaries? Are there swords guarding the value of what you have built?
How will you apply this information in your life?
The structural map is there, the sequence is clear, the only variable left is the choice to execute it.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.